Well, I think northern New Mexico is really a special place and a unique place in the United States. I mean, in the environmental setting is part of it, where the deserts and the Rocky Mountains meet, is a pretty special, magical landscape, to be sure.
I've always felt that the landscape here speaks to me. It's both rugged and stark, but then you get into the woods and it's very lush. So you have those contrasts in the natural world. But then the other piece of it is that there's a very strong sense of place in New Mexico that I think is specifically tied to the cultural identity and character, the mix of the natural and the cultural resources that have just always appealed to me.
A place that has qualities of an ancient world about it that's hard to find in North America. I mean, you basically have to go to Europe, really, to experience the sense of a place that has that kind of antiquity in its history.
I think there are definitely some special challenges for a federal land management agency like the Forest Service in New Mexico, given the long history of the region, the land tenure history. You're not talking about an area that has been, where the Forest Service came in and there was no uses or there was no relation to the land. And so we have, thousands of years of historical use of these lands. And it's not just historical, but it's still continued today.
This is an ancient homeland for Pueblo people and for the last 400 years, obviously, for the Spanish who came here in the early 1600s.
In the case of the tribes and the Hispanic people have been here for hundreds of years, and in some cases, their ancestors were here thousands of years ago. So their roots are very deep, and they have a connection to the land related both to subsistence and to spirituality that are still very much a part of their cultures.
What we had in the Rockies in particular, before the Forest Reserve Act came into being, was local populations basically using the mountains as local commons. The Spanish government, and later in its relatively brief time, the Mexican government, had awarded land grants to groups of locals who had petitioned for possibility to settle a stream, say, in a mountain valley. And those land grants, especially the communal land grants, the ones that were given to communities as opposed to individuals, they commonly granted them access to the mountains, what were called ejidos. And these land grant ejidos in the high mountains were places where the local population could graze their livestock, could cut firewood, could hunt, could divert mountain streams. They basically set up the mountains under a restricted regulatory use that, however, was only applicable to the local population. I mean, they didn't really anticipate that, in New Mexico's case, herders from Texas were going to be driving herds of cattle and sheep into the southern Rocky Mountains, into the Sangres. They didn't anticipate that railroads would let out contracts for tie and timber companies to cut trees in these mountain ejidos. The ejidos were established with the idea that they would govern local use, but not with the idea that anybody else was ever going to be interested in these local mountains. In New Mexico, these local commons, not having anticipated being invaded from the outside, simply didn't have the regulatory authority or the policing ability to keep timber companies, tie cutting groups, sheepmen and cattlemen from Texas and Oklahoma and elsewhere out of the mountains. Forest Reserve Act creates a national forest system ultimately that is a national commons where everyone in the United States ends up being a shareholder in the national forest that exists in a place like the Rockies. And so what the management plan for the national forest evolved into was this strategy where we're going to designate what the uses of these forests are at present and will be in the future, and we're going to have to regulate it. We're going to have to create a system whereby these forests are managed for the public, for the people of the United States, in order to create, as Gifford Pinchot so famously said, the greatest good for the greatest number over the longest time. And the only way to do that was to do so in a regulatory way, to give people, for example, grazing permits and permits to cut timber.
I think folks talk about, I've heard folks talk about like the Antiquities Act and sort of like some of the national monuments, and those are really to preserve things that are sort of dead. But in New Mexico, we have a very alive and vibrant culture that's based on these old settlements, but that the uses and the needs for the land or use of the land continue to till today.
I think that the forest really has something for everyone. For some people, they want to be out with their families and with their friends. And in other cases, people are looking for solitude. I think more and more people are going to keep coming to this part of the country, and particularly to be using the national forests. We still have a lot of open space in this state that is under federal management, which means it belongs to the American public. And so I think there's a draw to this part of the country for many people. And I think local people will continue to use the land as they always have.
I don't know of any other region in the United States that faces that same kind of complexity where you're dealing with populations that have a connection in past and current of use for those lands.
I think that it's a beautiful history, it's a beautiful story, and it's something that we've learned a lot and we must never forget. As we think about the story moving forward, we have to think about our youth. And in northern New Mexico, our youth are very important. That's how we pass down traditions, that's how we pass down opportunity. So when we think of the plan and going forward, it's really an opportunity for our youth, right? It's an opportunity for them to understand the history, understand the uses of those lands that were in place, and really help us to identify what are we going to really ensure that we protect and maintain, and what are we going to maybe modify and adjust as we move forward.
We live in an increasingly urban society where people think they get their food from a grocery store, they think they get their water from a tap, and they think they get their heat from these vents that are in their walls. Not understanding, where those things come from, where they get their water from. Well, from these mountains, for instance, Where do they get their sustenance from? Well, it's from some natural system or something out there, and we've divorced them from that, or people have been divorced from that.
I think it is important that we continue to have youth involved and get a better connection and understanding to just how important those watersheds and the forests are to our communities.
It's an important thing for us to share information and look out for the future of our youth, and that's essentially what Forest Plan Revision is doing, is it's putting together a sustainable management plan that allows for the multiple use and the balancing of those multiple uses in a way that the youth that are future leaders in the agency, future leaders in our community are really going to be proud of in 30 years. So plan revision is a great opportunity for all of us. It's a great opportunity for me as a forest supervisor. It's a great opportunity for employees on the national forests and also for our communities. Essentially, when I think of forest plan revision, it's really an effort to develop a shared vision.
We are really embracing a very open partnership relationship in this plan. And we are also sharing a vision with the landscape teams that they share, that we will institutionalize this relationship as we implement the plan. So our story is about getting a plan that's relevant and contemporary for the future that we implement together in the future.
On the agency side, we've very much changed. I think one of the big things that excites me as a forest supervisor is we're very focused on outcomes. We're not as excited about outputs anymore. We're really investing in relationships and engaging with our our stakeholders and the communities that use these national forests. And I think that's a big change that's really going to just give us a great opportunity to produce a really quality plan. It's really taking the changes that are existing in our society and applying them to how we manage the national forest.
Yes, and then having that shared vision for sustainability that we share implementation around with funding and staffing and resources, and that we're literally sharing our priorities across all management, including state, federal, private, in whatever ways that may make sense, so that we share the management for sustainability on those landscapes together.
I look at a plan as the next 30 years of conservation. It's really hard to predict what's going to be in place 30 years down the road, but I think through plan revision, it gives us an opportunity to really build in a plan that is adaptable and allows for resiliency on our landscapes, and really allows for an opportunity for the public to be successful, for communities to be successful in interacting with the national forest. So it gives them an opportunity to really develop the next 30 years of conservation for the mountain ranges that we love so much.
I think it's one of the great stories of the American West. I think we're wiser now than we ever have been before, and I look forward to the next century of the national forest story in New Mexico being one where we're finally able to resolve some of our conflicts with the long-standing inhabitants of the place, so that everybody is really proud of the land of many uses.